The sun poured through the towering windows of the Romano mansion, turning the marble floors of the garden courtyard into a mosaic of gold and shadow. Birds chirped lazily in the background, and for anyone passing by, it seemed like a perfect, ordinary morning. But this was no ordinary day. Not for Lorenzo Romano, the man the world whispered about in fear, whose name alone could freeze the blood of the most dangerous men. Not for Enzo, his 3-year-old son, whose innocence had never known the shadows of his father's world. And certainly not for Isabella, a woman who had stepped back into this life at the precise moment everything was about to change. Lorenzo stood near the fountain, sharply dressed in a tailored black suit that made him look every inch the mafia boss he was. Unshakable, untouchable, ruthless. Yet today, his eyes were softer. The armor he wore for the outside world fell apart around his son. He watched Enzo toddle forward, small, unsteady, holding a stuffed rabbit almost as big as he was. The boy's hair caught the sunlight like spun gold, his tiny feet barely making a sound against the polished stone. Lorenzo's gaze softened. He's growing so fast, he thought, a pang of something unfamiliar twisting in his chest. A rare vulnerability. For all his power, for all the fear he commanded, he had always known one thing he couldn't control. Enzo. Enzo stopped suddenly, mid-step. He tilted his head, eyes wide, and pointed toward the far edge of the garden. And then, the world froze. It wasn't just a boy pointing. It was a boy pointing at her. Isabella stood there, a figure bathed in sunlight, but shadowed by her own hesitation. Her dress, simple yet elegant, fluttered lightly in the wind. Her hair framed her face in soft waves, and for a moment, the years melted away. She hadn't seen Enzo in over 2 years. And yet, his eyes found hers instantly. The bodyguards, the servants, the men who had never hesitated to pull a trigger at Lorenzo's command, all of them froze. The garden fell silent. Even the birds seemed to hold their chirps. Lorenzo's chest tightened. His fingers curled into fists at his sides. Memory surged unbidden. A younger Isabella laughing under this very sun. Whispers of promises. Moments stolen in the chaos of a world neither of them could escape. And then, the pain of her sudden disappearance, the cold, frightening certainty that she had vanished to protect him and his son. Enzo took another step, holding out his tiny hand. Then, in a voice soft but clear enough to make every heart in the courtyard stop, "Mama." The word seemed impossibly heavy for such a small mouth. Every adult in the garden froze mid-breath. Some eyes widened. Some mouths hung slightly open. The word carried more than innocence. It carried truth, longing, and revelation. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes glistened as tears pooled in the corners. She had left to keep them safe, and now, in the full daylight of Lorenzo's mansion, the child she had never held but had always loved had called her Mama. Lorenzo felt his world tilt. The mafia boss, a man who had stared death in the eyes countless times, felt fear, not of enemies, but of this moment. Fear that life, in its most raw, unpredictable form, had just reminded him of what he had lost. "Enzo," he began, his voice low, unsteady. But the boy didn't turn to him. He didn't look to his father, the man who had ruled with iron fists and absolute control. He looked only at Isabella. The air seemed to thicken. Questions swirled silently among the onlookers. Who is she really? Is she a threat? Why is the boy calling her Mama? Even Lorenzo's most loyal men could not hide the tension creeping up their spines. Enzo took another step forward, tiny feet tapping against the stone. His gaze was unwavering. "Mama," he said again, louder this time, stretching his arms toward her. Isabella's knees weakened. She wanted to run, to step back, to hide, but her body betrayed her. She stepped forward, one hesitant, trembling step. The wind lifted a loose strand of hair across her face, and in that frozen tableau, it was impossible to know whether this was a miracle or a trap. Lorenzo's mind raced. Every instinct screamed at him, "Protect, protect, protect." But every emotion whispered a different truth. "Trust, Forgive. Let the boy decide. He moved forward, hand hovering above his son's shoulder, ready to intervene if danger appeared, but not yet. Not while Enzo's eyes shone with such pure clarity. The tension in the garden was palpable. Every servant, every guard, every guest seemed to have forgotten their breaths, forgotten time itself. Even the sunlight felt heavier, pressing down with expectation. Enzo reached Isabella. His small fingers brushed against her hand. The touch was electric, not in a violent way, but in a way that shook the very foundation of Lorenzo's world. Mama, he whispered again. Isabella looked down at him, tears spilling freely now, and whispered, Enzo, it's really you. And then, just as the air seemed about to release the tension, a sharp sound broke the spell. A chair scraping against the stone echoed across the courtyard. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. A shadow flickered near the gates of the mansion. Someone was watching. Lorenzo stiffened. The mafia boss who feared no man, who had ruled his world through fear and fire, suddenly felt the weight of every possible threat pressing in. His instincts kicked in, heart hammering. Protect my son. Protect Isabella. Protect this moment. Enzo, blissfully unaware of the danger, giggled softly, reaching for Isabella's face. But Lorenzo knew better. Danger lurked just beyond the garden. Someone had come to see the boy call Mama for the first time, and the world was no longer safe. Not for them. Not for this fragile, perfect moment. The camera of fate seemed to linger, hovering in suspense. Time slowed. Every eye followed the boy and the woman. Every heartbeat in the courtyard thundered like a drum. And in that suspended moment, Lorenzo realized something terrifying and beautiful all at once. Nothing would ever be the same. The boy's first word had changed everything, and the world had indeed stood still. The sunlight in the Romano mansion's garden still glimmered, but its warmth now felt heavy, almost suffocating. Lorenzo stood frozen, his sharp eyes tracking every movement of Isabella as she gently crouched to Enzo's level. The boy's tiny hand held hers, a lifeline tethering past and present. But behind Lorenzo's calm exterior, a storm of memories roared. 2 years ago, the memory hit like a dagger. Lorenzo and Isabella had shared laughter in the same sunlit garden. It had been a rare day of peace, before the mafia wars, before betrayal and blood. Lorenzo had never confessed his feelings fully, though Isabella had always known. And then, the night everything changed. Gunshots had shattered the silence. Shadows had crept into their lives, threatening to destroy the little family that had only begun to exist. Isabella had disappeared, leaving a letter that had cut through Lorenzo's heart like fire. I'm leaving to protect you and him. Don't try to follow. He had obeyed, because he loved her enough to let her go. But obedience had not healed him. The memory lingered, clawing at him every day. The silence of her absence, the emptiness of Enzo's first 2 years without her, the gnawing fear that she might never return. And now, here she was, alive, standing in sunlight. And the boy, their boy, had just called her Mama. The courtyard, once serene, was now a battlefield of emotions. Enzo's laughter, innocent and pure, contrasted sharply with the tension coiling around Lorenzo's chest. His men hovered nearby, uneasy, watching Isabella with suspicion. The past had a way of carrying dangers hidden in plain sight. Enzo, Isabella whispered again, her voice trembling. Do you remember me? The boy's wide eyes met hers, unwavering. Mama. That single word made Lorenzo's chest tighten. No, it can't be this easy. This moment. It can't be safe. Isabella looked up at him, fear flickering in her gaze. Lorenzo, He cut her off with a look, sharp and controlled. Not now, he said softly, almost more to himself than to her. Not now. Let me see him. Let me know he's safe. But the shadows of the past refused to stay silent. From the edge of the courtyard, Lorenzo caught a movement, a flicker of darkness that didn't belong to any servant or guest. He stiffened, his instincts, honed over years of running empires with fear and precision, screamed at him. Danger was near. Someone had been watching. Someone knew. He turned back to Isabella, his expression softening as he crouched slightly, coming closer to his son. "Stay close to me, Enzo. Always," he murmured, his hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder. Isabella's lips trembled. "Lorenzo, I left to protect him. I had to. You know what they would have done. To both of us." He remembered. He remembered every threat, every enemy, every life that had been a hair's breadth from ending that night. And he had thought he had shielded Enzo from it all. Yet now, the boy's innocence had drawn her back, and with it, the past threatening to consume them all. Do you forgive me?" Isabella asked, her voice breaking, almost lost to the wind. Lorenzo's eyes darkened. Forgiveness was a dangerous word in his world. And yet, the small hand of Enzo gripping hers, the fragile hope in the boy's eyes, made the words seem possible. He looked at her, studying her face, seeing not just the woman he loved, but the strength she had carried alone for years. I don't know," he admitted, voice low and raw. "But you're here, and he called you Mama. That changes everything." Enzo, sensing the tension between the adults, shuffled closer, holding Isabella's hand tightly while looking up at his father. "Papa," he said, unsure. Lorenzo's heart twisted. He's too young to understand this. Too young to carry the weight of our past. He knelt, bringing his face level with Enzo's. "It's okay, son. Mama's here now. You're safe." For a fleeting moment, the three of them, the father, mother, and son, formed a fragile, perfect circle. But the garden had no peace left to give. From the shadows near the mansion gate, a figure moved again. Subtle, quiet, deliberate. Lorenzo's gaze snapped to it. Whoever had been watching before was still there. And this time, closer. His mind raced through possibilities. An old rival? A spy? Someone who knew about Isabella's past involvement with the Mafia wars? He felt a flicker of anger, but also fear, not for himself, but for Enzo. For this boy who had just spoken a word that carried more power than any bullet, any gun, any deal Lorenzo had ever commanded. "Lorenzo." Isabella's voice cut through his thoughts. "We can't let them see him like this. Not now. Not ever." He nodded, teeth gritted. His hand rested protectively on Enzo's head. "I won't let anything happen. Not today. Not ever." A soft wind rustled through the garden. Enzo giggled, pointing at a butterfly dancing across the sunlight. Isabella's eyes softened, and Lorenzo allowed himself the briefest moment of calm. But he knew better. Calm never lasted in his world. The past had a way of catching up. Always. And as if to prove him right, a sudden noise, a low, deliberate footstep on stone, echoed from the far side of the mansion. Lorenzo's head snapped toward it, instincts flaring. The figure watching them had moved. Isabella noticed it too. She stiffened. Her hand tightened on Enzo's. "They're here," she whispered. Enzo looked between the two adults, sensing tension but not danger. "Mama?" he asked softly. Isabella's throat tightened. "Yes, baby. Mama's right here." But Lorenzo knew this was more than a threat. This was a reminder that the shadows of their past were still alive, waiting, patient, and hungry. He rose slowly, his eyes scanning every corner of the courtyard, every gate, every window. "Stay behind me," he instructed quietly. "No one moves without my command." The three of them, father, mother, and son, stood in the sunlight, their bond deepening in the face of an unseen threat. And in that moment, Lorenzo realized something chilling. The past they thought was buried was breathing again, watching, waiting, ready to strike. Enzo's small hand squeezed Isabella's, and she whispered to him, "You're safe, my love. No one can touch you." But Lorenzo's gaze never left the shadows. A storm was coming, and it would test everything: their love, their loyalty, their courage. And though the boy's first word had brought hope, Lorenzo understood that hope alone would not be enough to protect them from what was coming. The sunlight glinted on the edge of the marble fountain, casting sharp shadows across the courtyard. And in those shadows, the past waited, patient and unforgiving. Something was about to happen. Something that would change everything. The morning sun bathed the Romano mansion courtyard in golden light, but the warmth couldn't reach the tension that lingered in the air. Every shadow felt heavier, every sound sharper. Lorenzo's eyes never left Isabella, and Isabella's gaze was fixed on Enzo, as if the boy's very existence held the answer to questions neither of them dared speak aloud. Enzo, oblivious to the tension, toddled around the fountain, giggling as he tried to catch a butterfly. But even in his innocence, Lorenzo could see the shadows of the world creeping into the edges of his life. The boy's tiny hands were unprepared for the dangers that had stalked him before he even learned to walk. Lorenzo stepped closer to Isabella, his voice low and controlled. "We need to talk. Away from everyone." She nodded, a flicker of fear crossing her face. They moved to a secluded corner of the garden, sunlight spilling across their shoulders but shadows stretching behind them. Lorenzo's eyes, sharp and calculating, searched hers. There was so much she hadn't said, so much she had carried alone. "Why now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "After all these years, why come back?" Isabella's hands trembled slightly. "Because I had to make sure he was safe. And because he found me." Her gaze dropped to Enzo, who was happily spinning in the sunlight, unaware of the storm brewing around him. "I couldn't stay away any longer. Not after he called me Mama." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. That word, it was small, simple, innocent, but it carried more weight than any weapon he had ever held. It tore open wounds he had kept buried for years. "Do you have any idea what you've brought back with you?" he asked. "The enemies, Isabella. The rivals, they'll see him. They'll see you. And then they'll come." Her eyes darkened with the memory of those very threats. "I know. That's why I stayed away. That's why I left. You know I did it to protect him. To protect you." Lorenzo's chest tightened. He had lived with regrets, had punished himself for failing to shield the one person he loved. And now, here she was, standing in sunlight, in his garden, holding the son he had raised alone. "You left me with nothing," he said softly. "I raised him alone. I protected him alone. And now you walk back into our lives like the past isn't dangerous anymore." Isabella's lips quivered. "I never stopped watching you. I never stopped watching him. Every day, I prayed he was safe. Every night, I imagined what it would be like to see him again. And now," her voice broke, "he knows me. He trusts me. And I can't turn away." Lorenzo felt a pang of both anger and longing. His life had been ruled by fear, strategy, and control, yet here, in sunlight, he was powerless before the love and hope reflected in his son's eyes. A sudden noise snapped him back to reality, a faint rustle near the garden gate. Lorenzo stiffened, every sense on high alert. His world had taught him that peace was always temporary. Danger was never far behind. "Stay with him," he said sharply to Isabella, his hand brushing against hers briefly before stepping forward. Lorenzo's eyes scanned the courtyard, tracking the faint movement of someone hiding in the shadows. The warmth of the sun could not mask the threat lurking in the golden light. Isabella knelt beside Enzo, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "Don't worry, baby," she whispered. "Mama's right here. You're safe with us." Enzo giggled, pressing a small hand to her cheek. "Mama," he said again, the word innocent but powerful, a lifeline tethering the past to the present. Lorenzo's mind raced. Whoever had been watching before, they knew he was vulnerable. They knew that Isabella was back, and they knew that his son's innocence was the perfect target. Every strategy he had relied on for years, every trap, every lie, every secret, felt fragile under the weight of this moment. He took a step closer to Isabella and Enzo, lowering his voice to a growl only she could hear. "You didn't just come back. You brought the past with you. And the past doesn't forgive, Isabella. Not ever." Her hands tightened on Enzo's. Then we face it together. All of us. No more running. No more hiding. The boy, sensing the gravity in their voices, clung to both of them, his small body pressed against theirs. Lorenzo's heart constricted. This child, innocent and unaware of the dangers that stalked him, had just brought his parents together in a moment of fragile unity. But the shadow waiting in the garden gate reminded him that this unity could shatter in an instant. A soft, deliberate sound drew Lorenzo's attention again. A faint step, careful, calculated. Someone was watching, hiding behind the marble pillars. He narrowed his eyes, instincts flaring. This wasn't a stranger passing by. This was someone who had waited, someone who knew exactly when to strike. He clenched his fists, swallowing the tightness in his chest. "I can't let them touch him," he muttered under his breath, his gaze scanning every inch of the courtyard. Isabella's voice was steady, but her eyes mirrored the tension he felt. "We'll protect him," she said. "Together." The sun continued to pour over the garden, but it now felt like a stage for something far darker. The warmth was a lie, a veil over the dangerous truth. The enemies that had once forced Isabella away were still out there. They were patient, they were clever, and they had never stopped watching. Enzo, blissfully unaware, toddled a few steps forward, reaching toward a butterfly that danced in the sunlight. Isabella followed, guiding him gently. Lorenzo watched them, torn between the need to act and the desperate desire to freeze this moment in time. A sudden snap, like the breaking of a twig, echoed from the shadows near the mansion gate. Lorenzo's head snapped toward it, eyes sharp as steel. His hand brushed the hilt of the concealed weapon under his suit. Every muscle in his body tensed, ready to protect his son, ready to face the past he had tried to bury. Isabella stiffened beside Enzo. Her grip on him tightened. "They're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of Lorenzo's heart. Enzo looked between them, sensing tension but not danger. "Mama?" he asked softly, tilting his head. "Yes, baby," Isabella said firmly. "Mama's right here. Always." But Lorenzo knew better. Calm was a lie. Sunlight could not mask the shadows creeping closer. Danger had a way of finding them, even in the brightest of days. And then, from the edge of the courtyard, a figure emerged. A tall man, dressed in black, face obscured, but movements deliberate and menacing. He paused, studying the trio with cold precision. This was no ordinary observer. This was someone who had come with purpose, someone who had waited for the right moment to strike. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. His eyes locked on the intruder. "Stay behind me," he ordered Isabella, stepping protectively in front of Enzo. The courtyard, bathed in sunlight, had become a battlefield of shadows and secrets. Every heartbeat echoed in Lorenzo's chest. Every whisper of wind carried tension, and every step that intruder took brought the past back to life, more dangerous, more threatening than ever. The boy's innocent giggle clashed with the suffocating tension, a reminder of what was at stake. The first word he had spoken, "Mama," had brought love, hope, and danger all at once. And Lorenzo knew this was only the beginning. Someone had come to test them, to see if their bond, fragile as it was, could survive the weight of secrets buried in sunlight. And Lorenzo, the man who had faced death countless times, realized that nothing could prepare him for the storm that was about to break. The air in the Romano mansion courtyard had grown heavy, charged with tension so thick it seemed almost visible. Lorenzo's eyes scanned every shadow, every flicker of movement, while Isabella held Enzo close, her arms a shield around him. Sunlight fell in golden streams, but it could not illuminate the danger that had already stepped into their world. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, cold, precise, and unyielding. The intruder's gaze was fixed on Enzo, the boy who had just uttered a word that had changed everything. Lorenzo's hand went to the hilt of his gun, but he knew this would not be solved by firepower alone. "Not today. Stay behind me," Lorenzo whispered, his voice low and steady, yet trembling with urgency. Enzo clung tighter to Isabella, sensing the rising tension. "Mama?" he asked, small and uncertain. Yes, baby, Isabella whispered back, her voice trembling. Mama's here. You're safe. But safe was a fragile illusion. In this world, danger could arrive in sunlight and strike in an instant. The intruder stepped closer, and the sunlight glinted off the cold steel of a knife hidden in his hand. He was calm, too calm, every move measured, calculated. This wasn't just a man. This was a predator testing the boundaries of fear, challenging the strength of family. Lorenzo's instincts flared. His heart pounded, his muscles coiled like steel springs. Years of ruling with fear and power had prepared him for countless battles, but never for this. Protecting his son and the woman he had never stopped loving, with their lives intertwined in the golden light of day. Why are you here? Lorenzo demanded, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The intruder smirked, stepping closer, and then, suddenly, the silence broke. Shots rang out from the edges of the courtyard. The enemy had arrived, surrounding them, using the sunlit beauty of the garden as a stage for violence. Isabella instinctively dropped to one knee, shielding Enzo behind her. Lorenzo, we need to get him out of here, she shouted, voice fierce and determined. Lorenzo moved with precision, his body a mix of power and control. He fired a warning shot, and the sound cracked through the air. The attackers hesitated, giving him just enough time to grab Enzo in his arms. The boy's small body was heavy with trust and fear, and Lorenzo felt the weight of every decision he had made in his life pressing down on him. Hold on tight, son, Lorenzo whispered, his eyes scanning the courtyard, calculating their next move. I won't let anyone touch you. Isabella followed closely, eyes darting to the attackers, searching for weaknesses, planning a way to protect both her son and Lorenzo. Lorenzo, we need to work together. We can't fight them off alone. He nodded briefly, his jaw tight. Then we do what we have to do. No hesitation. The courtyard erupted into chaos. Enemies surrounded them, yet Lorenzo moved like a shadow, precise and deadly. Every movement calculated to protect Enzo, to shield Isabella. The sunlit garden became a stage of survival, a dance of life and death. Amid the chaos, Lorenzo caught Isabella's eye. There was no time for words, but everything was said in that look. We survive together, or not at all. Enzo, oblivious to the danger but sensing urgency, clutched Isabella's hand and peeked at his father. Papa, fight? He asked innocently. Lorenzo's heart twisted. Too young, too innocent. But he smiled briefly, masking fear with strength. Yes, son. Papa's always fighting for you. Isabella moved to help Lorenzo, picking off a few attackers with precision, her movements sharp and confident. She was no longer just a mother or a lover. She was a warrior, a protector, someone who had survived the shadows of their past and returned stronger than before. The attackers faltered under the combined force of the two adults. But just as Lorenzo thought they might push through, a new figure appeared, a man taller than the rest, dressed in black, face partially covered. The leader of the rival faction, calm, collected, and lethal. He stepped into the sunlight, smirking as if he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. Lorenzo froze, recognizing the danger immediately. Every instinct screamed at him. This man was different, more dangerous, smarter. And he had come for one reason. Enzo. Did you really think it would be this easy? The man said, voice smooth but chilling. Lorenzo's grip on Enzo tightened. He stepped in front of Isabella and his son, his body shielding them from the sunlight and the threat that had stepped into it. I warned you once, he said, his voice low and deadly. Stay away from my family. The rival leader chuckled, stepping closer. Family? He said mockingly. This boy. He's your weakness. And weaknesses die first. Lorenzo's fists clenched. He could feel the anger boiling inside him, a mix of love, fear, and rage. But he couldn't let emotion cloud his judgment. Every move had to be calculated. Every second counted. Enzo whimpered slightly, feeling the fear around him, and Isabella's hand tightened on his back. It's okay, baby, she whispered. We're together. No one can hurt us. Lorenzo's mind raced. He had faced countless enemies, but none of them had been like this. None had targeted what he loved most, his son. And in that moment, he realized the truth he had always known, but had never fully accepted. The greatest danger he would ever face wasn't from rivals, guns, or betrayal. It was protecting the people who mattered most. The rival leader smirked, and in a sudden, shocking move, he signaled to the attackers. They surged forward, closing in on the trio in the sunlight. Lorenzo moved like lightning, his body fluid and precise, deflecting attacks, protecting Enzo, keeping Isabella safe. Enzo, witnessing the courage of both his parents, pressed closer to them. His small hand reached for Isabella, then to Lorenzo, a symbol of trust and hope amid the chaos. And then, for a brief, suspended moment, time seemed to slow. The sunlight glinted off Lorenzo's gun, the knife in the rival leader's hand, the tears in Isabella's eyes. Every heartbeat, every breath, every movement was amplified. This was a battle not just for survival, but for love. Lorenzo realized something profound as he glanced at Isabella and Enzo. He had fought countless battles, but none had mattered as much as this. Nothing, no power, no empire, no fear he had ever inspired, mattered more than the safety of the woman he loved and the boy who had just called her Mama. The rival leader's smirk faltered as Lorenzo advanced with precision, taking control of the chaos. "This ends now," he growled, his voice a weapon as sharp as any blade. But the courtyard, bathed in sunlight, was still dangerous. Shadows lingered, whispers of threats hidden in the brilliance of day. And just as Lorenzo prepared for the final confrontation, a soft sound echoed from the edge of the courtyard, a whisper, a movement, a hint that the past was not done with them yet. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. The danger was far from over, and as the rival leader advanced, a surge of determination and love propelled him forward, ready to face whatever came next to protect the family that had brought him to life in ways he never imagined. The sunlight gleamed off the fountain, the leaves, and their weapons. But beneath the beauty of day, blood and love intertwined, waiting to determine the fate of all three lives. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for love, for family, and for the fragile hope that even in a world of violence, bonds could survive. And in that charged, golden courtyard, Lorenzo understood that the greatest battles were never fought with power alone. They were fought with courage, sacrifice, and the unwavering will to protect those who mattered most. The courtyard fell into tense silence for a heartbeat, every eye held in suspense, every muscle poised. The next move would decide everything. The Romano mansion courtyard, once a place of golden sunlight and laughter, now pulsed with tension. Dust swirled across the marble floors as shadows danced with the bright rays of day, turning the garden into a battlefield of light and darkness. Lorenzo's eyes, sharp and unrelenting, scanned every inch of the space. His hands gripped Enzo's small shoulders, protective, unyielding, as if his grip alone could shield the boy from the storm. Isabella crouched beside them, eyes darting to the intruders surrounding the courtyard. Every instinct screamed danger. Every breath was heavy with suspense. But she did not falter. Her hands hovered near the small knife she always kept hidden, ready to defend the boy who had just called her Mama for the first time. Enzo, oblivious to the threat, but sensing the tension, clung to both of them. "Mama, Papa?" he asked softly, his tiny voice carrying the weight of innocence that could pierce any armor. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "Yes, son. We're right here. Always." The rival leader from before stepped forward, eyes gleaming with cold amusement. "Did you really think this would end with words and hugs?" he sneered. "This is the world you live in, Romano. Power doesn't forgive, and neither do we." Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand what family is," he thought. "You've never faced love like this." With precise movements, he shifted, positioning himself between Enzo and Isabella, using his body as a shield. Isabella mirrored him, her presence fierce and unwavering. Together, they formed an unbreakable barrier, not just of flesh, but of love, courage, and unspoken vows. The courtyard erupted into controlled chaos. Shadows moved like predators, weapons glinting under the sun. Every sound, the scrape of shoes on marble, the rustle of leaves, the whispers of commands, heightened the tension, making every heartbeat thunder in Lorenzo's chest. Lorenzo moved with a lethal grace, protecting Enzo, blocking attacks, striking only when necessary. Isabella was beside him, her movements a blend of precision and ferocity. She was no longer just a mother or lover, she was a shield, a force of nature, someone who had survived darkness and returned stronger than anyone could anticipate. Amid the chaos, Enzo clung tighter, peering up at them with wide eyes. Mama, Papa, fight? He whispered, his innocence a stark contrast to the violence around them. Yes, baby, Lorenzo said softly, his voice steady despite the storm. Papa's fighting for you. Mama's fighting for you. Always. Time seemed to slow. Every movement, every glance, every breath hung suspended. The sunlight glinted off weapons, sweat, and tears. The courtyard was alive with tension, a dance of survival and emotion. Then, as if testing their resolve, the rival leader advanced. Calm, smiling, confident. Every step he took was deliberate, meant to intimidate, to show dominance. But as his eyes locked on Enzo, Lorenzo felt a surge of fury unlike anything he had ever known. No one touches him. Lorenzo growled, voice low but deadly, the words cutting through the noise like a blade. The rival leader laughed softly, a sound meant to unnerve, but it only fueled Lorenzo's determination. And what will you do, Romano? Protect him with your life? Lorenzo's eyes burned. Yes, he thought, with everything I am, with every heartbeat. In that moment, Enzo, sensing the courage radiating from his parents, took a bold step forward. His tiny hand reached for Isabella's face, brushing her cheek. Mama, he whispered again, his voice carrying hope, love, and pure trust. The words struck the courtyard like a lightning bolt. Time seemed to freeze. Every attacker hesitated. Every breath caught. Every shadow recoiled in the presence of something far stronger than fear. Love. Isabella knelt and gathered him in her arms, holding him close. Tears streamed down her face. Yes, baby. Mama's here. Always. Lorenzo stepped closer, placing his hand over hers and Enzo's, forming a bond of steel, a shield that no weapon could pierce. We're together, he said softly. Nothing will break this. Not now. Not ever. The rival leader's smirk faltered. He had underestimated something he could not measure, something no amount of planning could defeat. He saw it in their eyes, the bond forged by love, tested by time and danger, unyielding and untouchable. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out from the far edge of the courtyard. The rival leader's men scattered in chaos, not expecting the precision and coordination of Lorenzo and Isabella. Every move they made was calculated, every strike purposeful. Sunlight and shadow danced across the marble as the attackers fell back, disoriented, powerless against the determination radiating from the family. And then, silence. The courtyard held its breath. The only sound was the ragged breathing of Lorenzo and Isabella, the quiet giggle of Enzo, and the distant echoes of footsteps retreating into the shadows. Lorenzo knelt beside Enzo, holding him tightly. You're safe now, son. Safe, he whispered. His voice was steady, but his heart still raced. Isabella rested her hand on his shoulder, her gaze meeting his. There was no need for words. Everything they had been through, every danger, every loss, had led to this moment. They had survived. Together. Enzo, blissfully unaware of the depth of the threat they had just faced, looked up at both of them. Mama, Papa, love? He asked innocently. Isabella's eyes glistened. Yes, baby. Love, she whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. Lorenzo smiled, a rare, genuine smile that carried relief, pride, and an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He leaned down, brushing a hand through Enzo's hair. Yes, son. Love. And nothing, no danger, no darkness, will ever take that from us. The sunlight poured over them, turning the courtyard into a sanctuary of warmth after the storm. The shadows lingered at the edges, but they no longer threatened the trio in the center. The boys' first word, the reunion of love, and the unbreakable bond they had formed had created something stronger than fear, stronger than any rival or weapon. As the camera of fate seemed to linger, capturing the moment in golden light, Lorenzo realized that this was not just survival. This was a new beginning, a dawn where love triumphed over darkness, where the past could no longer dictate the present. But even in this new light, a flicker of shadow remained at the edge of the courtyard. Someone, somewhere, was still watching. Danger had not disappeared, it had only retreated, waiting for the right moment. And Lorenzo knew, as he looked at Isabella and Enzo, that whatever came next, they would face it together. Love, courage, and family had become their weapons, and nothing could take that from them. The boys' laughter filled the courtyard. The golden sun bathed them in warmth. And in that perfect, fragile moment, the world seemed to pause, holding its breath for the first time in years. Lorenzo glanced at Isabella, and their eyes met, unspoken words passing between them. We made it. Together. Enzo reached up, hugging them both tightly. Mama, Papa. Forever? He asked. Yes, baby, Isabella said softly, tears falling freely. Forever. And in that moment, the first word he had spoken, the word that had shattered silence, fear, and pain, echoed in their hearts. Mama. It was not just a word. It was a promise. A beginning. A new dawn. The sun shone brighter, the shadows receding, and though danger still lingered beyond the gates, within the garden, the Romano family had found their sanctuary. The story of love, fear, and courage had reached a peak, but the memory of that first mama would linger forever, an unbreakable bond that would carry them through whatever came next.